Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, as the Chair of the Government Administration Committee, can I say what a pleasure it is to report this bill back to the House. I think a number of members, particularly new ones, are under the misapprehension that a Statutes Amendment Bill is quite boring.
Oh, who said that? Oh.
Well, other than you, Mr Fafoy. It's my view that it's not boring, and it's actually a really important part of the parliamentary process. What it's meant to do is correct errors in drafting. It's not meant to have any policy changes in. A Statutes Amendment Bill shouldn't have any policy changes. It shouldn't have matters that are so big that they actually could impact on the policy intention indirectly, and they should be non-controversial. So it might sound like a boring frame, but actually it's a really important part of the process, and I want to commend all the members of our Select Committee because I think we've taken this process very seriously. As the Minister said, interestingly enough, he said he endorsed the recommendations of the committee, but he didn't admit that we'd fixed up quite a few mistakes that he had made on his introduction in the bill. But that's all right. We don't need an admission of mistakes from the Minister because it might be a bit much for us to cope with. But I'm very pleased that the Minister did note that he endorsed the recommendations. We made a couple of changes in the bill to remove the possibility of further corrections being made in the next Statutes Amendment Bill, and we took out two parts. That's one of the most important things that I want to mention. Neither the Justice section, the Victims' Orders Against Violent Offenders Act change, nor the Charities Act change were considered by the committee to meet the criteria for statutes amendment. My understanding is that the Victims' Orders Against Violent Offenders is going to be introduced separately, so that's good. We weren't trying to stop the progress of it, we just didn't think it was appropriate for these measures to be included in statutes amendment. And the other provision, the Charities Act changes, are actually the subject of consideration right at this very time by the Select Committee. So we separated it off, we called for submissions and put that part of the statutes amendment in as a separate measure. Mr Speaker, as I said at the beginning, the point of statutes amendment is to have omnibus provisions that tidy up things that are in other bills, which otherwise wouldn't get the priority of the House. They're not considered important enough, but they do need to be fixed, they do need to be corrected. In that vein, there are two supplementary order papers that I note have been proposed, and I want to highly commend them both. The sound of that crash that you just heard is David Seymour fainting in his office as I commend a supplementary order paper in his name. Chris Fafoy has moved a supplementary order paper which puts a National Party members' bill, which has been drawn out of the ballot, into the proper place, which is into the Statutes Amendment Bill. A disgraceful tactic that I have never seen before in the House, to use the legitimate process of the members' bill to clog up the process and block other members' bills. We get little enough opportunity as it is, actually. We get very little opportunity to put forward our ideas for legislative change because we're in the opposition. And for members of the National Party to put in ridiculous bills, clog up the process, just makes a laughingstock of Parliament, but actually, much to the rest of our amusement, it's made a laughingstock of them. I have never heard such ridicule as that's been directed at the National Party backbench for doing such stupid things. So Chris Fafoy's amendment puts the Airport Authorities Act 1966 changes so that the insertion of suitable advertisements in a newspaper circulating in the district where the airport is situated replace that with publicising the sale in what the authority considers to be a fair and reasonable manner. Entirely appropriate amendment for a Statutes Amendment Bill, and I look forward to hearing probably quite lengthy debate on that very point at the Select Committee. Mr Speaker, the other amendment is to an equally ludicrous National Party backbench Members' Bill, which again has been drawn from the ballot, and this supplementary order paper is in the name of David Seymour. It's quite a bit longer. So I would have to reflect quite carefully on that about whether it would meet the criteria of a Statutes Amendment Bill. But given that despite its length it says pretty well nothing, then it probably is appropriate to go in a Statutes Amendment Bill. And I certainly support David Seymour's intention, not only in putting it in the right place, but in adding further ridicule to that which has already been dished out up and down the country at the National Party backbench. Mr Chairman, as the Minister indicated when he spoke at the start of the second reading, we only had 5 submissions on this bill, which probably indicates that most people were satisfied with it. we only heard 2 submitters. The Ministry of Justice gave us pretty good advice. I'm not sure that our advisors agreed right at the start that some of the proposals were unsuitable for a Statutes Amendment Bill, but a further part of that Statutes Amendment process is that a proposal for deletion, for example, as we did, of two parts of this bill, doesn't need a majority vote by the Select Committee. Statutes Amendment Bill only requires 1 single Member of Parliament to object, and it can't proceed. Notwithstanding that point, our committee worked pretty well, I think, and reached unanimous decisions on all of these provisions. So 28 different pieces of legislation altered in this. The 2 changes that we made to correct the corrections, if you like, were to the Employment Relations Act 2000 and to the Protection of Personal and Property Rights Act 1988. So, having got the bill before us to correct mistakes in previous legislation, we discovered a couple more, and I want to acknowledge the rigorous assistance that the submitters gave us, both the ones that just wrote in and the ones that submitted orally. Mr. Speaker, the process that provides the opportunity for these corrections to be made, I don't think should be brushed over lightly. I know that a number of members, including ministers who were responsible for various parts of this bill, when I raised concerns about the appropriateness with them directly, basically said it's been signed off by all parties in the House, because that's the consideration that these Statutes Amendment Bills go through before they are introduced to the House and passed on to a Select Committee. I was a bit disappointed at that initial response because, as I said, we looked at the proposals within this bill with quite a lot of rigour and genuinely considered that some of them weren't appropriate. I remember about 4 years ago we had a Statutes Amendment Bill at our Select Committee, and we said to the officials, we don't think this is an appropriate bit to go in the legislation. Why did you introduce it? And they said, well, we don't think that this would have a high priority in the House, and the Statutes Amendment Bill was a train that was passing, and we decided to hitch another wagon onto it. They said that literally. They weren't trying to cause any grief or harm. They wanted their proposals put before Parliament, and they thought they'd get away with it, putting it into a Statutes Amendment Bill. Well, I don't blame them for that. It must be pretty frustrating, particularly when you see the national backbench rubbish bills clogging up the system, as we have over recent weeks. And here are good public servants who have got genuine policy issues that the Minister wants to progress, and they're keen to progress, and they can't find a legislative spot for it. That's what those rubbish National Party backbench bills actually do. They stop good policy being introduced to this House and debated. What is Parliament for if it's not to progress good issues? We don't always agree with initiatives introduced by the government, but that's their mandate to do that. They should, or perhaps they've got nothing left to do. Perhaps they think they've sorted all the problems. Last week in the House, I heard about eight pieces of legislation that could have been introduced. Some of them were SOPs from the Green Party, some of them were SOPs from the Labour Party, and they were supported by this side of the House to address the crisis of homelessness that we have in New Zealand. But no, let's not do anything in this parliament to address that crisis, let's waste the time of the House with rubbish bills like we've had from the National Party backbench. Unfortunately, that's the situation.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member, but her time has expired.